were lost in an environment that she could freely navigate. It's for the best, Arthur, I said aloud to myself. After a moment, I reached out to Sylvie and informed her of the situation, then leapt off the cliff. The people of the wall handled the news surprisingly well, though there was a brief surge of panic between the adept leadership and the fact that most of the people present were either trained soldiers or veteran adventurers. They were quick to ready themselves for battle. In the span of an hour, archers and conjurers were positioned on every floor of the wall, staring warily out from the wall's many arrow slits. Melee troops, largely members of the Bulwark Division, were hurrying into formation just behind the gate to the Beast Glades. Work was not yet complete in the tunnels below, and many workers still toiled within them, rushing to finish the preparations. Proteus had tasked many of the adventurers to assist them. The trailblazers had vanished, moving into position so quickly it was as if just Mia had teleported them all away. As for myself, I waited inside the meeting tent with Sylvie. Proteus was pacing back and forth behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes darting back and forth as if he were reading an invisible text. Gavik and Callum stood nearby, quiet and tense. Taking advantage of the moment's peace, I checked the contents of my dimension ring. The only useful item inside was Dawn's ballad. Even cracked and broken, the sword was still better than any other weapon I'd ever used. I took it out, inspecting the translucent teal blade, the point of which had been melted away. A spiderweb of cracks spread down the blade from the ruined tip. I really wish this damn weapon inside my hand would manifest already, I grumbled in my head.
Now would be as good a time as any,
Sylvie agreed. General, Gavik said suddenly, drawing my attention away from Dawn's ballad. Please reconsider. Allow us to accompany you. I looked at the two mages and shook my head. As I said before, your job will be to support the troops here. Callum answered, frustration bleeding into his voice. Commander Virion has personally picked Gavik and me to assist you in battle. If something were to happen after sending you by yourself, I'm not looking down on you two, but the chance of something happening to me or Sylvie only increases if you two come with us. The tent flap was pushed aside, and a tall, muscular woman with bright red eyes and dark skin entered. Those startling red eyes moved quickly from face to face, stopping on mine. Please excuse the intrusion, she said, bowing slightly before turning to Proteus. Father, I brought the weapons you asked for. Come in, Senior. Proteus waved the woman over, gracing her with a rare smile. Arthur, this is Senior Flamesworth, my daughter, and the master blacksmith here at the wall. Tess had referred to that little girl's master as Senior back when we were touring the wall together. Tess had seemed to have a good relationship with her, but even so, the very mention of the word daughter coming from Proteus's lips annoyed me. Jasmine's stories about her life, about how her family had practically thrown her away, were fresh in my mind. This wasn't the time for such thoughts, however, so I pushed down my negative feelings toward the senior captain and introduced myself to his daughter. Arthur Lewin, pleasure to meet you, I said, sheathing Dawn's ballad. Senior opened her mouth to reply, but was cut off by her father. Senior here is one of the finest blacksmiths in Sapin, on par with even the master smiths of Dar, due to her excellent ability to manipulate fire attribute mana during the forging process, Proteus boasted. I heard from Tessia that you prefer thinner blades, Senior said, ignoring Proteus's interruption and handing me the longer of the two swords. I'm sure it's nowhere near as well crafted as your weapon, but my father informed me that you'll be in battle for an extended period of time. Having multiple backup weapons won't do you any harm. Thank you, I replied, drawing the sword from its plain steel scabbard. The blade was a pale gold color, about 3 fingers in width, and slightly longer than Dawn's ballad. After testing its balance with a few swings, I began channeling mana into it. The thin sword hummed as fire, wind, water, and earth magic all began to swirl around the blade in harmony. I continued injecting mana into the sword until I could see the blade beginning to deteriorate from the burden of being imbued with multiple elements. Cutting off the flow of mana into the sword, I sheathed it and said, Not bad. I think it'll suffice. The weak compliment was all I could muster. I was struggling to suppress my personal feelings toward the Flamesworth family, despite myself. Senya couldn't keep the disappointment from her face, but she accepted my words with a bow. I'm honored. Putting the longer sword into my ring and fastening the shorter one onto my hip beside Dawn's ballad, I turned to Proteus. Are the ground troops ready to advance as soon as I leave? I'm aware of the plan, General. Don't worry about us. Just come back in one piece, Proteus replied. We'll be waiting for the signal. Without another word, I walked past Senior Flamesworth and stepped out of the tent. I was met with a thunderous cheer. All around me were soldiers, merchants, and adventurers, all clapping and shouting my name. Your presence is what is holding this wall together, General, Proteus said from just behind me. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Rather than feeling joy or pride, however, I was overcome with horror. Within the crowd, I had just seen my father. He wasn't supposed to be here, and if he was here, the rest of the Twin Horns must be as well. No, they were supposed to be in Black Bend City, far away from this battle. Sylvie squeezed my hand.
Arthur, everyone is watching.
I didn't care. I wanted to run to my father right then and demand that he leave, that he take Mother and the Twin Horns and get away from the wall. But I couldn't. One look from my father stopped me in my tracks. He had such a determined expression that, even as a general, I didn't dare stop him. He would never forget. Most of these soldiers will make it out alive, and Dad is one of the stronger soldiers, I thought, trying to calm myself down. Swallowing the anxiety and the dread building up inside me, I saluted the crowd, locking eyes with my father. He saluted back, and despite the fight that we had not long ago, he smiled at me. Another wave of cheers rolled through the crowd as Sylvie shifted into her draconic form. My bond reeled her head back and let out a deafening roar, shaking the ground. We ascended with a single beat from Sylvie's broad wings, clearing the height of the wall in just a few seconds and giving me a clear view of the approaching horde, as well as the people below who we were responsible for protecting. My hands trembled as I finally felt the true gravity of the situation. I had brought my sister here. My parents were here, as well as the Twin Horns. Their lives, the lives of every man and woman at the wall, depended on me.
You're not alone, Arthur,
Sylvie said, as she spread her obsidian wings.
Nothing has changed from when you made the decision to bring Ellie along.
She was right. Despite the beast horde arriving a day early, the preparations had already been made. Both my mother and sister had the Phoenix Worm pendants to keep them safe, and I had even given Ellie a transmission scroll in case she needed to reach out to me. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Was it because of the promise I had made with Tess?
What are you doing?
Around my neck seemed to weigh
You
down.
idiot!
But it wasn't just that.
Everyone knows not to make a fucking promise.
Happening seemed off.
Death is imminent, I'm telling you.
Feeling that this attack was more than what it seemed. What were the Alacrians trying to accomplish? Focus, Arthur. You're going into battle.
Are you ready?
Sylvie asked.
You idiot,
Excitement
man.
pouring into me. Not as ready as you are, I teased, bolstered by her confidence. Sylvie's laughter rang in my head as the world around us turned into a blur. With her seal released, every inch of her body was brimming with power. Each stroke of her wings made gales behind us, and we were soon approaching the army of beasts. Scanning the churning sea of fangs and claws with mana-enhanced vision, I found each of the Alacrian mages spread throughout the horde, shepherding along the massive herd. How about we send them a little welcoming gift? I suggested.
Ooh, this nigga better go crazy.
Exactly.
Go crazy,
Sylvie
kill this.
responded, her wings beating slowly to keep us aloft high above the mana beasts. Space began to distort around us as mana gathered into Sylvie's open maw, forming into a golden white sphere, which grew larger with every passing breath until it was even larger than me. The sphere erupted into a beam of pure mana, which cut silently through the space between us and the enemy. A blinding flash forced me to turn away, but the sounds of shattering stone and shrieking mana beasts were carried on a draft of hot air that I could feel even from this distance. So began the battle. hole that had formed from Sylvie's attack slowly disappeared, covered by the steady stream of mana beasts marching toward the wall. Despite the devastation the blast had caused, the corrupted creatures hardly seemed to notice. Sylvie released another blast of mana, but this time several shields appeared, compounded upon one another and absorbing the brunt of the attack. Looks like we won't be able to just rain spells down on them from the comfort of the air, I mused. After you, Sylvie thought, turning her long neck to give me a toothy grin. Try to keep up. Normally, falling headfirst from several thousand feet in the air into an army of magical beasts should have caused some sort of fear or anxiety, but that wasn't the case for me. My heart hammered against my ribcage not out of fear, but excitement. Mana flooded through my body as wind gathered around me, swirling and condensing as I landed like a meteor in the center of the beast horde. The layers of wind surrounding me burst outward, shredding and flinging away hundreds of beasts caught in the blast. Slowly, I rose to my feet, Dawn's ballad in my hand. The impact had made a crater at least 10 feet deep, and dozens of sets of monstrous eyes glared down at me from above. The creatures snarled and snapped at the air, but, at least for a moment, the entire horde had come to a standstill. A wild, manic war cry suddenly burst out from a bipedal canine at least 3 times my height. That frenzied howl rippled through the other beasts surrounding me, as if waking them up from a stupor. The corrupted mana beasts, which moments ago had marched along in a drug-induced state of apathy, all suddenly wakened in a concert of cries, roars, and jarring screeches. But piercing through the cries of the corrupted mana beasts was the thunderous roar of my bond as she landed in their midst. Sylvie immediately ripped out the bipedal canine's throat with her fangs and crushed 4 other mana beasts with a swipe of her tail. Try to keep up, she thought to me, her challenge burning in my mind. Eager to keep up with my bond, I leapt from the crater and slammed into a reptilian creature with 3 swirling tails. The force of the impact was enough to knock it flat, and Dawn's ballad finished it with a quick slash across its neck, cleanly separating head from body. Dozens of mana beasts swarmed around me, snarling and spitting, lashing out with claws, talons, and paws. I conjured a surge of churning air that threw the closest beasts backwards into the swarming beasts behind them. So thick was the press that the creatures were crawling over each other to get closer to me. A wolf-like beast with sharp ridges of bone protruding from much of its body leapt from the back of another large, 3-tailed reptile, but was immediately turned end over end by the force of my cyclone barrier. Dawn's ballad flashed, and the creature's corpse landed beside me. I held that position for several minutes, limiting my mana usage and relying instead on my battle prowess, accumulated through my 2 lifetimes, as I cut down one enemy after the next. For each beast I killed, 2 or 3 replaced it, but we had prepared for this. After all, Sylvie and I weren't going to win this battle by ourselves. Our job was to do as much damage as possible.
Something is coming your way. Be careful,
Sylvie said, her message of caution somewhat undercut by the jolt of excitement I felt as she faced off against an S-class mana beast somewhere nearby. A pack of wolves, each the size of Boo and crackling with an aura of blue and white lightning, pushed their way through the ring of enemies, snapping and snarling until the other mana beasts fell back. The Thunder Wolves, I counted 13 in the pack, carefully circled around me, staying just outside of the rotating wall of wind. These ones seem to have some brains, I thought. It was obvious by their murky black pelts that the wolves had been corrupted, but unlike the other beasts which had marched mindlessly toward the wall, these ones remained alert. The pack leader, a larger wolf with a wild, spiky mane that reminded me of a lion, let out a short, sharp bark, and the others pounced, crackling lightning arcing out from their bodies, jumping from one wolf to the next and forming a snare intended to trap me within their circle. Stomping my foot, I conjured a ring of stone spikes from the ground, skewering the Thunder Wolves mid-leap. Only the leader escaped, dodging around the earthen spears and launching himself at me. I stepped to the side, easily avoiding the alpha's snapping jaws, and brought Dawn's ballad up to lay open its stomach. but a bolt of lightning jumped from its spiky mane and struck me in the shoulder, throwing me off balance and forcing my blow off course. I lunged after the thunder wolf, which was turning to circle around me again. Mana flared bright white at the melted tip of my teal blade as I focused it into a sharp point. I stomped down, exaggerating the motion, and conjured another spike of earth, just to the wolf's left. The alpha took the bait, dodging right and preparing to leap again, but it was too late. Dawn's ballad impaled it through the chest, and the lightning coursing through its fur flickered and faded, and the beast slumped to the ground, dead. A piercing screech drew my attention to the sky. A flock of bat-winged birds was swooping down, with their sharp metal beaks homed in on me. I cast a net of lightning directly into the path of the birds. The metal beaks dropped like flies, their wings spasming from the shock. With the thunder wolves dead, the surrounding horde's restraint broke, and the monsters flooded back in to attack. Sylvie's voice rang in my mind.
Arthur, these beasts seem off. Most of them aren't even retaliating. They just keep marching toward the wall. Only some of the stronger ones and their packs are actually putting up a fight.
I feel it too. I'm not sure what the Alacrians did. They must be controlling the beasts, directing them to get to the wall no matter what, I replied. I think it's time to turn up the heat, Sylve. Looking to stem the constant flow of mana beasts, I began to rain down destructive spells on the horde. Spheres of fire, water, and lightning orbited around me, burning, slashing, and electrocuting any beasts that came near me while I focused on casting spell after spell. The terrain became a strange, otherworldly patchwork of elemental domains.
Mana rotation.
Some parts of the ground were scorched and littered with burning corpses, while others transformed into gruesome gardens of stone spikes from which beasts' corpses dangled like limp flowers. A storm of ice knives raged like a tornado through the battlefield, leaving behind a carpet of shredded flesh. An odor of burning fur, fresh meat, and metallic blood settled over the battlefield like a fog. Even navigating became a challenge, as I had to maneuver around the lingering effects of my own spells, the corpses of fallen mana beasts, and the endless march of those still living.
It's working, Arthur,
Sylvie thought to me.
Some of the more powerful mana beasts are starting to break away from the horde. Where are the Alacrian mages, though? I haven't seen one since they conjured those shields earlier.
Me neither. Let's see if we can't thin out a few of these big ones before the horde reaches the wall. Sylvie was right. Almost immediately after her warning, an S-class mana beast appeared, charging through the lesser creatures with reckless abandon. It was a humanoid feline, twice my height and all muscle, covered in dense crimson fur that acted as armor and wielding deadly claws. It took me a second to remember its name, a Razor Grimalkin. Its speed and agility were on par with Cordry, my martial arts master from Ephiatis, and it would have torn most adventurers to shreds. However, it relied entirely on its thick fur for defense and focused on attacking aggressively at breakneck speed. Its fur, however, wasn't a problem for me. Come on, I roared, dodging the Razor Grimalkin's clawed kick and nicking its neck with the edge of my wind-imbued blade. Blood rushed to my head, drowning out everything other than the opponent in front of me. The beast, which had the ability to kill its victims long before they could even fear it, hissed and dashed toward me, its body blurring into a red streak. I used Thunderclap Impulse to heighten my senses, and the charging beast came suddenly into focus again. To the outside world, we must have seemed little more than two intangible blurs flashing around each other on the battlefield. Each swipe of the Razor Grimalkin's mana-infused claws extended through the air and left deep gashes in the earth, and oftentimes the nearby mana beasts, while opening it up to another cut from Dawn's ballad. My objective, the reason Sylvie and I threw ourselves into the path of 20,000 murderous monsters, faded to the back of my mind as I dominated the S-class mana beast. Though my legs ached from old wounds, and the scratches left by those vicious claws stung, I was in much better shape than the panting, oversized cat. Heaving for breath, its fur matted with blood, the Razor Grimalkin backed away, suddenly wary. Sensing that the fight had gone out of it, I charged. Just as the creature was about to bolt, I conjured a slab of condensed air behind it and pulled with all my strength. The wall of air struck it mid-stride, knocking it off balance and into the path of my blade. Dragging the dead S-Class beast up by the bloodied scruff of its neck, I roared in triumph. The mana beasts around me, no matter how deranged and feral they had become due to the Alacrian's corruption, began to quiver. I felt a rush of euphoria, seeing the beasts around me shake in fear, my eyes scanning for the next victim to take its chances against me.
Arthur, the beasts may be corrupted, but they're still intelligent beings. We have no choice but to kill for a greater cause. Don't take joy in it.
Sylvie's words were like cold water splashed in my face. I had indeed lost myself to the bloodlust for a moment, high on the freedom to wreak havoc. I had acted like a wild beast let loose from its cage. It would be easy to say that this is what war did to everyone. In part, this was true. Fighting countless beasts slowly turned men into monsters themselves. However, it was also true that I enjoyed it. Being surrounded by death, yet never being able to kill freely myself, might have had something to do with it. The countless duels I had fought in my previous life had all been supervised and restricted by rules and laws. Here, it was different. As I sobered from the battle frenzy, I could feel many aches and wounds I hadn't even realized existed. There was no time to recuperate or rest, however. I could already feel the approach of another S-Class mana beast. Its footsteps shook the earth, and its killing intent pressed down on me like a weighted net. It didn't take long for me to see the towering monstrosity, which trampled the smaller, corrupted beasts like they were insects. The Iron Hyrax, appropriately named, was as tall as a 3-story building, and every inch of its body was covered in metallic plates. Spikes sprouted along its spine, and at the end of its trunk-like snout was a dented metal orb the size of Sylvie's head.
Do you need help?
Sylvie asked, sensing my hesitation as I watched the colossal beast advance. Not yet, I conveyed, sheathing Dawn's ballad. Wanting to test the Iron Hyrax's resilience, I threw an arc of lightning at the beast, but it didn't even flinch. As it stomped through the press, it swung its snout like a flail, bludgeoning mana beasts left and right. The mana beasts fortunate enough to evade the Iron Hyrax's snout were soon trampled by its thick hooves. That's when I saw him. A human. An Alacrian maid was holding on for his life from a perch between two of the spikes on the S-Class beast's back. At this distance, it was easy to tell that this was not part of his plan. That's when it clicked. The weaker mana beasts appearing almost sedated and mostly ignoring Sylvie and me even as we killed them. The higher-tiered mana beasts seemingly possessing their own will even under the effects of whatever the Alacrians were using to control them. The pieces of a plan came together in my head as I watched the Alacrian mage struggle with something in his hand. A small, black stone. I launched a fireball into the Iron Hyrax's face. The flaming sphere splashed across its metallic hide without so much as a scorch mark. But it did its job. The beast bellowed and reared up in anger. The Alacrian mage was barely able to hold on. Intent on flattening me with its flail-like snout, the beast charged recklessly. I continued throwing spells I knew were just barely strong enough to annoy it, which kept it charging through the other beasts, doing nearly as much damage to the horde as Sylvie or I had done. Wherever the mammoth beast went, it left a trail of crushed corpses in its wake. To keep its attention on me, I continued to pelt it with spells. I drove earthen spikes into its hooves, layered the ground in ice so that it'd slip, and threw blades of wind at its eyes to blur its vision, but my half-assed spells weren't doing any real damage. Fire seemed to work best, but when I threw another fireball at it, a translucent shield flickered in front of it, blocking my spell before it could land. I could use your help now, Sylvie, I said, projecting a calm, leisurely air, then turned the beast toward where I could sense Sylvie was fighting.
Wow. How did you make it so angry?
She replied, leaping into the air with a beat of her wings. Pin the beast down for as long as you can, I instructed. With a mental confirmation, Sylvie flew up high into the sky before dropping back down in a nosedive. Clearing the beasts around me with a gust of wind, I stood my ground as the iron hyrax lumbered toward me. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I waited for the moment when the beast's front legs were just about to touch the ground as it charged. This sort of spell required precision and timing, and the distance compounded the difficulty. But as a white core mage, it felt as natural as if I was shaping clay. The ground just below the beast's front feet splintered, sending it crashing onto its knees. However, its momentum continued to carry the beast, and the mage riding on its back, toward me. Preparing my mind and body for the toll about to come, I waited until the beast was just a few feet away. Then I activated Static Void. The elephantine beast and the Alacrian mage both froze in place, paused in time. Even as a white core mage, the size and complexity of the mana art caused my mana core to groan in protest, but I managed to hold the time pause until the moment before Sylvie reached our enemies. "Now!" she screamed mentally. I immediately released Static Void and leaped out of the way, almost crashing into the slavering jaws of a reptilian mana beast. It twisted and snapped as I flew past, rolled, and came back to my feet, already casting a spell to summon a thick stone wall between us to protect myself. The force of Sylvie's headlong dive created a shockwave of wind and debris that sent the mana beasts in the vicinity tumbling. I heard the reptilian beast I had just passed crack against the other side of the wall, which I then kicked over, crushing the mindless creature under a ton of stone. With no time to rest, I dashed toward the iron hyrax, which was dazed but still alive, and struggling to get out of Sylvie's grasp. "Don't kill it yet," I said to my bond.
"I'm not confident I even can. These metal plates are even thicker than my scales, and the hide beneath them is made of tiny interlocking scales, like chainmail."
Leaping up on top of the beast's back, I pried the oblong black stone from the unconscious mage's vice-like grip, then threw him down to the ground. He jolted awake from the impact, his unfocused eyes drifting aimlessly as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. He nearly jumped out of his skin when I landed on the ground in front of him. Before he had the chance to speak, I held the black stone to his face. "Does this control the mana beasts?" His eyes widened, and he made a desperate swipe at the stone, but I pushed him back to the ground with my foot. Conjuring a stone nail, I impaled his hand to the ground. His scream carried over the battlefield, cutting through the earthquake rumble of Sylvie's struggle with the mammoth beast behind us.
"Hurry! I can't keep him still for much longer,"
Sylvie conveyed. I glanced back at Sylvie, who was perched on her prey, biting and clawing and shoving it to the ground, keeping it pinned. With every surge of its massive bulk, though, it pushed her a little farther and came a little closer to righting itself. A gurgled cough drew my attention back to the Alacrian, and I saw with horror that he had bitten off his own tongue and was currently choking on blood. Reaching into his mouth, I cauterized the wound with fire mana, but the damage was done. "Damn it! What is it with you Alacrians and killing yourselves?" I sighed. "Well, if he won't tell me, I might as well find out myself." I quickly cycled mana through the stone. When I found that it wouldn't react to any type of mana, or even ether, I did the only other thing I could think of. I crushed it in my hand. Chapter 22. Battlefield. The mage's eyes widened in panic as the crumbled fragments of the black stone fell from my grasp. Suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped, every mana beast in the vicinity seemed to wake up, their glazed and lifeless eyes burning with fury. It was as if they all went mad simultaneously. The mana beasts began growling and hissing at each other, bearing fangs, claws, and horns at any living thing near to them. It didn't take long for all hell to break loose. Beasts pounced on one another without even a semblance of sanity. They leaped at me with reckless abandon, though they were so wild, few made it to me. Anytime two beasts collided, they would fall into a manic battle and tear each other to shreds. Quickly drawing the two swords I had received from Senior Flamesworth, I transformed into a flurry of blades, cutting through the mana beasts that attacked me until a mound of bloody carcasses accumulated beneath my feet. Despite the massacre that befell those who came close, the mana beasts continued to attack, throwing their lives away as if possessed.
Arthur, I can't hold on anymore.
Sylvie's struggling voice sounded in my mind. I turned back to see the iron hyrax break free, its eyes locked on me as it pawed the ground in preparation to charge. However, I noticed a subtle difference in the mammoth beast's behavior. The way it glared down at me still indicated rage, but the fact that it didn't throw itself directly at me showed some level of calculation, or at least of control, that the lesser beasts didn't possess. It seemed to be considering me, or waiting for me to react to its aggression. I was, however, slightly preoccupied by the never-ending flow of mana beasts that seemed hell-bent on ripping my limbs off. "Enough!" I roared, releasing every ounce of murderous intent I had built up throughout the battle. To the naked eye, nothing had changed, but for anyone that had an ounce of sense, they felt it. Even the beasts, as deranged as they were, froze in their tracks, trembling. This may not have worked while they were in their stupor, but now the beasts around me shrank back out of instinctual self-preservation, some of the weaker ones collapsing entirely. With a little space to breathe, I took a step toward the mammoth beast. A path opened up as I walked. The mana beasts were unable to bear being too close. I locked eyes with a colossal S-class monster, directing the entirety of my killing intent toward it. It was a primitive thing to do, much like flexing your muscles in front of your opponent to discourage them, but it worked. The colossal monster broke eye contact with me, its body slackening. Finally, with a mournful bellow, the S-class beast turned and fled, trampling smaller mana beasts with each step.
It's been a while since I felt you unleash your intent. A good reminder not to tease you too much,
Sylvie joked as she joined me at my side. It seems to only work on the more intelligent and powerful beasts, though, I replied, keeping my expression deadpan. The mana beasts that had been temporarily paralyzed by my intent had quickly broken free and resumed mauling each other. Having dealt with the largest threat, I turned back to the Alacrian mage. Despite being bloody and incapacitated, he was still alive. None of the beasts seemed to want to go near him. Seeing how the crazed beasts acted, it couldn't have been out of pity or loyalty to their master. Now, I peered down at the frightened mage. I wonder how you're still alive. Sylvie craned her neck and began sniffing at the Alacrian.
I'm not sure if this has anything to do with it, but there's a rather repulsive stench coming from this human.
The Alacrian mage let out a muffled whimper as my bond bared her fangs at him, but there was little else he could do. Perhaps overwhelmed by the dragon's presence, he fell unconscious once again. I decided to leave him there. He'd most likely die within a few minutes, painlessly in his sleep. That was more than he'd offer the people of Dalcatha, given the chance. I bent down, sniffing at the unconscious mage's clothes. Smelling nothing but the sweat and grime of travel and battle, I used mana to enhance my olfactory sense while dulling the rest of my senses. There it was, a repulsive stench, just as Sylvie had described, but very subtle to a human's poor sense of smell. The beasts, though, if Sylvie could smell it, they certainly could too. The Alacrians must have discovered some sort of elixir or serum that was repellent to the corrupted mana beasts. That would explain their avoidance of him, even in their madness. There was little time to spend wondering about it now, though. There was a lot more work to be done. I spent the following hours on the ground, hacking, stabbing, and shooting mana beasts with swords and spells. My time training under Cordry had honed my body to last for days with the help of mana arts and martial technique, and the mock battles against Cathal, Hester, Wound, and Camus had provided ample experience battling against multiple opponents, which proved invaluable against the unceasing waves of mana beasts without overexerting my mana. Though our purpose of doing as much damage to the horde as possible hadn't changed, Sylvie and I had also spent the time hunting for other Alacrian mages. The substance that the enemy used to basically conceal themselves from corrupted beasts was an enticing bounty, and I already knew what to use it for. However, even after hours of searching, our efforts were fruitless. Just the sheer number of mana beasts alone made it almost impossible to distinguish even larger mana beasts, let alone a human. "How's everything on your end, Sylvie?" I asked, as I struck down yet another mad monstrosity.
"A bit tired, I'll admit, but I'm fine,"
she responded, and I could sense the fatigue through our shared emotions.
"Tired already?
It's only been like 4 hours of nonstop fighting," I teased, plunging Dawn's ballad into the ribcage of a 4-armed gorilla creature. Of my 3 swords, only Dawn's ballad had held up. The broken blade of the short sword was sticking out of a boorish beast's skull somewhere, and the long sword had grown dull enough to be used as a training blade.
"The wall is getting closer, Arthur. The conjurers and archers will be in range to attack soon. It'll be even harder to find the enemy mages then."
"You're right. Once the beast horde reaches the wall and the trap activates, it'll be impossible to find them," I responded back, as I slashed through another pack of frenzied canine beasts.
"What do you suggest?"
my bond asked, as she fought her way toward me. "There's no choice but to rely on Realmheart to search for the mages." There was a moment of silence in our minds as I felt Sylvie think over her next words.
"I want to keep your family safe as well, Arthur. But is it wise to deviate from your obligations as a general and lance? Using Realmheart will take a toll on you. Even then, you run the risk of it being for nothing."
Gritting my teeth, I jumped up on Sylvie's back, letting the memories of my recent fight with my parents flood out of my mind and into my bonds. It was easier to share the experience that way than trying to...
Bro, he was spamming Realmheart a couple fucking years ago. A couple months ago. What are you talking
just for a
about?
little bit. I need to be able to tell myself that I'm doing everything I can to keep my family safe, and finding this substance might just do that. Assuming everything went according to plan, we'd be sacrificing parts of the wall and the underground tunnels, but it'd be much safer for our melee troops to fight. Even so, with so many people I cared about participating in the battle, it was impossible not to be anxious and afraid for them.
"I understand,"
Sylvie assured me, her powerful wings beating down.
"Besides, who knows what uses Gideon could find for this substance?"
With a blast of wind, he soared up into the sky, shooting past several flying mana beasts before they could even react. Taking a deep breath, I ignited Sylvia's beast will from deep within my mana core and let its power flow freely out into my body. I felt the physical changes to my body as the warm surge of power filled me from the inside. Long white bangs obstructed my view, and the runes covering my body and limbs glowed brightly even through the thick clothes I wore. Then my vision turned to shades of gray, and flecks of colorful light began emerging out of thin air. No matter how many times I used this skill, it was breathtaking every single time. Being able to physically see the very substance that made up all magic in the atmosphere truly made it feel like I had fallen into a magical world.
"Focus, Arthur. Can you distinguish any of the Elacrian mages?"
Sylvie said, with a hint of envy. My bond had yet to grasp this ability, despite breaking out of the seal that her mother had placed on her before birth. "Not really," I replied, narrowing my gaze to try and pinpoint any mana fluctuations that seemed different from the magic that the beasts were able to cast. Sylvie continued flying over the army, avoiding or killing any flying mana beasts that got in her way, while I scoured the horde for any sign of the Elacrian mages hiding amongst it. When Sylvie swerved suddenly to avoid a giant, corrupted vulture, I pulled my gaze from the forces below us for just a moment, and I noticed something odd up toward the Elshire forest. "Sylvie, can you take us higher for a minute?" I asked my bond, trying to make out what was happening up north. She let loose a gout of fire, which burned through the vulture's wing and sent it tumbling to the ground. We ascended until it was impossible to make out the individual mana beasts below us. But as expansive and threatening as the beast horde appeared, my focus was on a much bigger threat. In the distance, I could see mana fluctuations that seemed to be made up of tens of thousands of mages, the Elacrian army. The bright trail of mana snaked through the Elshire forest, right to the heart of Elenoir Kingdom. Chapter 23. Decisions made. Tessia Aerith.
Dava stepped up beside me, his knuckles white from gripping his dual axes for dear life. The smug grin that he always wore was nowhere in sight.
This doesn't look good, Tessia.
Behind me were gathered the 200 soldiers that made up my unit, along with the ragtag squads of elven soldiers that had been placed under my command. Amongst them were many more civilian elves, garbed only in cloth or leather for protection. These were the brave men and women who stayed behind to protect their home and their fleeing loved ones from the approaching army. Every one of them wore a grim expression. The soldiers gripped their weapons, while the civilians anxiously clenched their kitchen knives and gardening tools, and the steady drone of marching grew louder and louder. The once lively elven town just behind us had long since been evacuated, but we knew the evacuees would be slow-moving. There were many children and elders amongst them. If we fled here, if we couldn't hold out long enough, they would all die. This wasn't just a matter of protecting an abandoned town on the outskirts. This was our chance to halt the Evacuees' forces' momentum and show them we wouldn't give up Eleanor without a fight. My heart pounded against my chest, and my knees felt weak. No matter how strong my mana core was, no matter how much I had trained, I felt nothing but fear in that moment. Yes, I couldn't show it. I wouldn't.
Agreed. He was happily, gleefully going along with it. Guess so. Kinda feels over the top, doesn't it? Asked Pseudo. What do you mean? This is perfect! It was certainly true that we could probably get away with this without being noticed. Something extraordinary happened next. With the complete annihilation of the magic beast at hand, the soldiers of the sky ceased their onslaught and froze one by one. What's happening? Did the soldiers suddenly feel compassion for their enemies? No, that couldn't be it. The invading army maintained a tight grip on their weapons, but their hands were also trembling slightly. Instead of pity, their eyes were full of terror. Their gazes were trained on something behind Jinu. It was clear that whatever lay behind him was about to turn the tide of this battle. Jinu looked down instead of over his shoulder. A shadow was creeping across the brownish-red terrain, quickly spreading to the dead bodies and covering the blood-soaked land below. As the shadow passed beneath the dead, screams originated from places unknown. Jinu couldn't ascertain the source of the cries, but he did know a skill that had the exact same effect. Monarch's domain. Shivers ran up his spine, and Jinu slowly looked behind him. There stood a knight, covered from head to toe in black armor. An ominous dark aura rose from the knight and the horse he rode. Could that be? Jinu instinctively knew there was only one name befitting this knight. Shadow Monarch. Simply being in his presence made the very air feel heavy and suffocating. Everyone, from the soldiers of the sky to the intelligent and unintelligent magic beasts alike on the ground, held their collective breath and gave the Shadow Monarch their full attention. All eyes on the battlefield were on him. Shadow Monarch glared at the flying soldiers and stretched out his hand as if grabbing something. The aerial army flinched and retreated slightly. An eerie silence weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. The monarch's dignified voice shattered the quiet. Arise! Badum. Jinu's heart leaped. Arise. That single word caused a ripple that spread out at a frightening speed, animating the shadows. The blood-red battlefield turned into rolling black waves. The shadow soldiers turned their dark eyes toward the enemy, their strange cries indistinguishable from angry roars or screams of anguish. There was no more fear of the enemy in those eyes. This scene was cause enough to make the soldiers of the sky tremble,
But the monarch didn't stop there. The knight gave a mighty bellow that reverberated in Jinu's heart instead of his eardrums. It shook hearts, knees, and the land below. The shadow soldiers raised their weapons high and answered. With that, the shadow soldiers were transformed. Across the land, the deceased magic beasts were now shadow soldiers ready for battle. Jinu held his breath. He found the roar of the shadow soldiers thrilling. Dum. His heart thumped loudly. If this was the peak of the Shadow Monarch's power, then Jinu still had a very long way to go.
Welcome to the Joe Rogan
The
Podcast
hesitant
number
soldiers of the
1058.
sky
Today we
were
have
on
a
the
special
move.
guest.
They regrouped, and then struck the soldiers in black, again reminding Jinu of silver bees. But these reborn magic beasts
Look at this
weren't
broke
as
version
easy
of
to
life.
defeat.
You probably couldn't even run a
Weapons struck
podcast.
weapons, and soldiers fought soldiers, as the silver and black armies clashed, and became one giant mass. The earth shook from the din of the battle. A battle that had almost ended as a one-sided
Hey
match
Jamie, pull up this
was a
broker's
full-on
bank account.
war again. The appearance of just one individual, albeit a terrifying individual with incredible power,
Jamie, drag this
had
bookie
turned the
out of
tide. Gino take his eyes off it. The battle raged. This was a much bloodier and fiercer conflict unfolding than before. While the magic beasts had been no match for soldiers of the sky in life, they were able to stand their ground as shadow soldiers after death. However, bravery or combat ability. The intrepid soldiers of the sky still overpowered their shadow enemies in terms of fighting skills and weapons. Reincarnation hadn't helped the Shadow Army in that regard, so initially, it did not seem as though the scales of war had changed. However, as soon as the Shadow Soldiers were defeated, they immediately regenerated. were torn apart by the giant. But that was just the beginning. The mighty soldiers of the sky renewed their onslaught. With the silver soldiers in front of them and the joint animal and demon armies behind, the shadow soldiers were surrounded. The tides of war had turned once again. Don't. Gino grabbed his chest, and it throbbed in pain. The hunter slowly shifted his attention toward the shadow monarch standing next to him. He could somehow sense how the knight felt. But how? Just as Gino could sense the emotions of the shadow soldiers, he also picked up on what Shadow Monarch was feeling. Intense anger that boiled inside him. No, it was beyond anger. It was profound rage. Shadow soldiers would repeatedly die and regenerate. Though their ability to recover made them feel endless, Gino knew all too well the limits of his power he likewise possessed. Alas, he didn't have enough mana. Once one's mana levels were drained, the Shadow Soldiers would stay down, and the Shadow Monarch would have no soldiers to command. Gino sensed that his vast store of magic power was slowly draining. The Monarch turned his horse around and charged the new arrivals. The ensuing battle was fierce and resulted in piles of dead bodies and an ocean of blood. The flame of the war, lit by countless soldiers, was consuming all living things. However, the end was nigh. Not many creatures remained on the battlefield. The monarch himself had lost his mount during the battle, but that didn't stop him from cutting down 2 demon knights in his way. He then stood before one demon, leaning against an odd-looking rock formation to catch his breath. Its face was obscured by a helmet, but Shadow Monarch knew whom he faced. We could have ended the war today. Why did you betray me? The demon feebly looked up. It had suffered serious wounds and was unlikely to survive. The voice that came from behind the helmet sounded near death. What could have been? We could have exterminated all of you, but... Shadow Monarch's voice was cold as ice. The demon laughed heartily and replied, Please for long. Gino couldn't make out what it said. Had he misheard? No. Though Gino couldn't understand, the monarch apparently did. He reached out and grabbed the demon by its neck, pulled it closer. The demon gurgled in pain. Crunk! The part of its armor that protected its neck was bent out of shape by Shadow Monarch's grip. Yet the demon made sure to relay everything it intended. Schlick! The monarch's thumb plunged into the demon's neck. The demon coughed blood. At that moment, Gino made eye contact with the demon from under its helmet. Stunned, the hunter released its neck. The demon hit the ground, lifeless. No way. Gino had seen those eyes before, but that couldn't be. The company. Gino's heart pounded hard. He shook his head a few times and then cautiously removed the demon's helmet. They were definitely the same eyes. How could Gino forget them? The helmet fell from Gino's hands. Clang. The demon's eyes were still open and filled with burning hatred. Gino had seen these eyes on the top floor of the demon's castle. Allah, the demon monarch? As Gino realized who the demon was, he had another startling revelation. His hands and his feet, legs, and chest were all covered in black armor. At some point, Gino had taken control of the body of the Shadow Monarch. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Gino's heart began pounding loudly in his ears. He placed his hand on his chest. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. His eyes widened. How? Why didn't I realize until now? He had grown more conscious of his heartbeat after the double dungeon, yet he had failed to notice earlier. Gino's trembling hand moved to the right side of his chest. He felt the heartbeat, one from the left and another from the right. Ba-dum. 2 hearts were beating as one. As he stared at the ground in complete shock, 4 shadows approached from above, slowly growing larger. He quickly looked to the sky. 4 angels, each with 6 wings, slowly descended toward him. That was the end of the memory. At the chime, he was once again surrounded by darkness. As he drifted into unconsciousness, he heard the clear voice of the system. Data retrieval is complete. 7. Uninvited guests. As a master of the top guild in Korea, Jong-in Che was initially unhappy about the request from Chin-cheol to go to a C-rank gate. He even considered sending a strike squad with some high-rank hunters in his place. However, once he heard the details, he couldn't resist. Hunter Sung entered a double dungeon? A double dungeon was intriguing enough, but Hunter Sung was also involved. How many hunters, much less guild masters, wouldn't be excited? Jong-in postponed the raid he'd been preparing for, and immediately summoned his elite hunters. As Chin-cheol had emphasized, this was an urgent matter. The association has asked for our cooperation. It seems we'll need to intervene. The hunters murmured in hushed tones. The association had summoned them just as they were about to embark on an A-rank raid, so the gravity of the situation wasn't lost on them. They had also just heard the breaking news about what was happening in Japan, so they were feeling even more agitated. What happened? The question came from the second most influential member of the guild. Jong-in turned to the vice guild master. I'm told a double dungeon was discovered in the C-ranked gate. A double dungeon? A dungeon within a dungeon was certainly uncommon, but it didn't make much sense for the association to call on the Hunters Guild for a mere C-ranked gate. Seeing her puzzlement, Jong-in explained further. Looks like Hunter Jin Woo-sung is fighting something in there alone. For Manager Wu to not act himself and call on us. What's the matter, Hunter Cha? Her expression had transformed. Nothing. Okay then. Hunter Sung should be fine on his own, but let's get going just in case. Hain nodded, and the others hurriedly packed their bags. Their only luggage was their weapons, but they still needed to be stowed with the utmost care. We're missing some. Another hunter tapped the shoulder of the colleague doing the head count and pointed toward a corner of the room where a man was slumped on the ground in abject despair. Suzuki? Even be... Oh, right. The hunter understood right away. Suzuki was a Japanese hunter who had been recruited by Korea not too long ago. His eyes were glued to the news broadcast on the cell phone. Let's go do our part. Got it. The two hunters left Suzuki at the offices and got in one of the guild vans. One by one, the vehicles carrying the elite strike squad sped off to their destination. Yikes! Hot, hot! The cigarette had fallen out of the startled Kim's hand. It landed on the sand, so there was no need to put it out. The way he aggressively stomped on the butt, though, spoke to his emotional state. Still, this was no time to vent one's frustrations on some stupid cigarette. Kim's gaze turned back to the parked vans. He'd been so busy noting that every person emerging from the vehicles was an elite member of the Hunters Guild that he hadn't initially felt the cigarette ashes falling on his fingers. Jong-in Che, Hae-in Cha, and Jong-ho. Even Ki-hoon's home? The top dogs of the Hunters Guild had gathered in this location. To think he'd stumbled on this galaxy of stars after following Chin-cheol on a whim. Strangely, the gate in question was only a sea-ring. Kim's mouth went dry. He couldn't even begin to imagine what was going on inside. Manager Wu was usually forthcoming about these matters, but as even he was keeping tight-lipped, Kim had been unable to do much except chain smoke to calm his nerves. All the butts he'd discarded had formed a small mound at his feet. Chin-cheol paid no attention to the yearning gaze of the reporter, and hurriedly approached Jong-in. Like Chin-cheol earlier, the latter couldn't tear his eyes away from the gate. Holy shit! What the fuck? What is that thing? Jong-in couldn't stem the tide of the curses from spilling unconsciously from his mouth. Chin-cheol possessed exceptionally sharp senses for a brawler, but Jong-in was Korea's most powerful mage. When it came to detecting the flow of magic energy, he was only behind Yoon-ho Baek with his eyes of a beast and Ji Woo-sung's supernatural level of perception. Can you handle it? That's how Jincho framed his question. But Jongin heard the unspoken, "I cannot." He replied grimly, "You said Hunter Sung was inside?" Affirmative. Jongin nodded slowly. Who else would be? Better yet, who else would be capable of taking on an enemy emitting this much mana? Is he trying to single-handedly save the planet or something? Jongin blurted out. Jincho sympathized with a tired nod. It sounded quite plausible. Whether he can handle it or not, we still need to go in there. We owe it to Hunter Sung. If the combined might of Jin Sung and the Hunter's Guild couldn't act, then no one else in Korea. If they couldn't stop the beast here, the country was screwed. What was that? Did they save Hunter Sung? Kim, who was doing his best to eavesdrop from a distance, picked up Jinu's name, and his eyes became as wide as a rabbit's. Hunter Sung is in there. Kim stared at the gate before he hastily scanned the area. Besides 2 S-rank hunters, there were a sizable number of A-ranks, in addition to Hunter Sung already inside. My notepad! Where's my notepad? Smelling a stoop, he rushed to find his notepad. From this point on, he couldn't afford to miss a single word uttered, or the smallest event transpiring. Everyone else was preoccupied with what was going on in Japan. This opportunity was like mana from heaven, a once-in-a-lifetime exclusive involving 3 S-rank hunters and the Hunters Association. Is that why Manager Wu wouldn't give me a quote earlier? Hunter Sung's information was classified, so he was a VIP under special supervision by the Hunters Association. No wonder Manager Wu. The elite strike squad finished their preparations as Jincho and Jongin ended their conversation. The tanks picked up their defensive gear, the damage dealers grabbed their weapons, and the healers equipped themselves with magic tools charged with honor. They were ready as quickly and efficiently as one would expect from the top guild in the country. Jongin exchanged looks with Hain and nodded. Hain nodded back to let him know that her inspection of the squad was done. They were good to go. The elite members of the surveillance team had completed their preparations earlier. Jincho reviewed some information from a subordinate and then turned to face the others with a solemn expression. Let's move out. They had a long way to go. The hunters sped down the tunnel, but they didn't run. Although they were all high-ranked, not everyone could move at the same speed. Hain was especially fast, but when she tried to dash ahead, Jongin grabbed her by the wrist. What are you going to do alone, Cha? Jongin understood her desire to rescue Jinu, but haste would endanger her. Some of us can't keep up with you, and we'll be at a disadvantage if we try to push ourselves. With a sullen expression, Hain moved to the rear of the group. Seeing her reaction, Jincho mumbled under her breath. Excuse me? Jincho quickly dismissed Jongin's query. Oh, no, it's nothing. Jongin raised an eyebrow before facing forward. The sinister mana was coming from that direction, so they had to stay alert. Jongin thought about Hunter Sung being in the same position. There wasn't much else they could do for him at this point. Swiftly, keep their wits about them and pray for his safety. They couldn't let the stress cloud their minds. Jongin made conversation with Jincho to ease the tension. How did Hunter Sung end up going inside? I don't know the details, but according to witnesses, Hunter Sung seemed to already be aware that this gate had a double dungeon. Jongin's forehead wrinkled. Any ideas on the matter? No, but something doesn't feel right. Oh? I've done my share of research on Hunter Sung. Jongin was a guild master, and one of his duties was to recruit high-level hunters. For obvious reasons, he has shown a great deal of interest in Chino. There was a so he knew exactly what Jongin was talking about. About 6 months ago, Chino had entered a double dungeon. And here he was again, seeking out another after all this time. Those who knew of both incidents had a hard time brushing this off as mere coincidence. As Jincho predicted, Jongin brought it up. Double dungeons are rare enough that most barely see one in their lifetime. Yet Hunter Sung has crossed paths with 2 of them. Not only that, but he also went looking for the second. Jincho didn't answer. Just as Chong-in alluded, much about Jinu was shrouded in mystery. The double dungeon was a real hall of Korea, desperately needed Jinu's help. That was why Jincho had asked the Hunters Guild for help right away, without waiting for clearance from his superiors. Hunter Sung's safety was to be secured by any means necessary. There would be time to ask questions later. Rousing himself from his thoughts, Jincho raised his head. Here. It would have taken almost an hour for most hunters to arrive, but it only took about 10 minutes for the elite strike squad and surveillance team to travel the same distance on foot. The end of the tunnel was in sight. I think that's it. Yes, I sense something. Chong-in froze as he registered a menacing presence. Thankfully, he could still sense Jinu's presence as well. Everything's fine, as long as Hunter Sung is okay. Jinu's abilities combined with support from the elite hunters here should have been sufficient to handle whatever kind of magic beast was up ahead. Reassured, Chong-in called out to the group. Let's hurry, everyone! The elite squad from the Hunters Guild and the Association charged through the huge doorway, resembling the entrance of an ancient castle. The sight that met them was unlike anything they'd ever laid eyes on. What on earth? What the hell is this place? There were countless broken stone statues littering the floor. Rubble was piled up throughout the room. Look! One of the hunters pointed to a truly enormous statue of some unknown deity standing frozen in time. Its hands interlocked in the middle of slamming the ground. Its head, with half its face blown off, caught their attention. Jincho's heart began to race as he recalled the testimonies of the survivors from the previous double dungeon incident. It mentioned all this. The statue of a god, the other stone guardians, everything. They each reported the same thing. This place was occupied by a monstrous statue that could vaporize a C-rank hunter with one look, as well as innumerable stone statues whose movements could not be followed with the naked eye. The entire area was scarred by an epic battle that had recently taken place here. Wait, where is Hunter Sung? With the threats neutralized, their priority was to confirm Hunter Sung's status. Chong-in eventually spotted him farther into the room. He's over there! Jinu was lying quietly on his back, as if asleep, just below the fists of the Colossus. Hunter Sung! Hain raised both her arms to stop the hunters about to rush the thing dead in their tracks. Jincho impatiently turned to look at her and noticed how sweaty her face seemed. Hunter Cha? She bit her lower lip.
My name is Walter Hartwell White.
There's something over there. It was then that a certain stone statue kneeling next to Jinu slowly raised itself up. The wings on its back were shredded, and it was missing an arm. I don't remember inviting humans in here. The angel statue stood up straight, and, having scanned the intruders, grinned. Ah. The hunters were rendered speechless. Chong-in didn't know what to say, but he was sure of one thing. This living statue was a source of the ominous energy he had been feeling this entire time. The mana radiating from it was so strong that the space around it was distorted. Chong-in's entire body had goosebumps, even as he gazed upon the statue from a distance. He peeked at Jinu. Considering his opponent was such a being, he understood why Jinu was lying unconscious on the ground. He also understood that only Jinu could have destroyed all the other statues while simultaneously contending with the angel. Chong-in was impressed beyond belief. Now it's up to us. A big drop of sweat dripped down the side of Chong-in's face. He wasn't even sure whether this enemy was a magic beast, but it was definitely stronger than the monstrous ant from Jeju Island. Chong-in swallowed with difficulty. Hain and Jincho had turned pale. They too could feel the immense power of the being before them, and were appropriately distraught. Meanwhile, the other hunters behind the trio were bowled over for another reason. Did that thing just speak? I'm not hearing things, right? The magic beast that speaks our language? The hunters exchanged looks of disbelief. They were witnessing the impossible. It was a well-established fact that intelligent magic beasts had their own language. When gates began to appear, people had tried learning their language, but their attempts failed due to the magic beast's brutal natures. Those captured with much effort gradually went insane in the presence of humans. Even when restrained, the beasts went berserk, trying to kill their captors, not caring if they broke their own flesh or broke their own bones in the process. They eventually either mentally collapsed or were put out of their misery. Humans and magic beasts cannot coexist, and communication with them is impossible. This was the consensus among the scientific community that studied the creatures. Yet, here one stood, speaking Korean as if it was the most natural thing in the world. This magic beast could be considered the find of the century, but it filled the hearts of all the hunters with unexplainable dread. Their primal instincts sounded an alarm in each of them. As the statue took a step forward, the hunters took a trembling step back. The angel's gaze slowly scanned from left to right, as if relishing the fear and panic on their faces. Mighty humans. Its eyes resembled those of a predator eyeing its next meal. You'll make a sufficient first offering for His Highness. Would a smiling snake look this creepy? The hunters were immobilized by the sight. His Highness? Was there another magic beast? Chongin was puzzled, but he didn't have time. The angel statue ripped the arm off one of the statues on the ground. What is it doing? The bewildered hunters got their answer when the angel placed the severed arm on its right shoulder, and the two parts melded together. What the? The angel leisurely stretched out its newly attached arm. Zoom. It appeared right in front of them. Before they could react, it threw a powerful punch with its new fist and crushed a hunter's face. Face crumpled, the hunter flew back and slammed into a wall. By the time his nearby colleagues attempted a counterattack, the angel had disappeared. Where? Over there! It had returned to its previous location as if it hadn't moved at all. It wiggled its fingers. The test of its new hand had been successful. Young-chul! No! The cries of the hunters confirmed they had a casualty. He died on the spot. An A-rank. Chongyin's eyes darted around in a panic. Your son fought this thing all by himself? Chongyin was more concerned with trying to find a way out of the situation than dealing with the pain of losing his colleague. However, not everyone could handle the task objectively. You son of a bitch! One of the female hunters in the group was the deceased hunter's lover, and she charged the statue, enraged. In each hand burned a ball of fire. Before she could chuck them, though, someone grabbed her wrist. She turned her head to see Hayden. She shook her arm and yelled at the S-rank hunter. Let go of me! Please, you have to control yourself. I said let go! Rein it in. The woman took a proper look at Hayen, who was biting her lower lip in grief. I promise, I'm holding back, too. The grim look on Hayen's face gave the other woman pause. She was fully aware that since the magic beast had shown no further aggression following its first attack, it would be best not to provoke it. Still, she just couldn't stand there doing nothing when the beast had killed her beloved in such a gruesome manner. She quietly sobbed. When she was certain her colleague wasn't about to do anything rash, Hayen looked toward Gina. She, too, was tamping down her anger. She had no idea why, but the magic beast had stopped attacking them, and Gina was still breathing just fine. She looked peaceful, as if sleeping. At this point, the most they could do was buy time until Gina recovered. At that moment, the angel statue finished its warm-up stretches and burst out laughing. Hog, hog. Its voice echoed in the empty lair as it focused on the hunters. Time to have some fun. Its eyes glowed red. Was it going to attack? The hunters tightened their grips on their weapons and braced for battle. With only one opponent, they might stand a chance. Their ranks included plenty of the best hunters in Korea, including 2 S ranks, just as hope loomed in their hearts. Rumble. The interior of the dungeon quaked. Oh,
live at 308
Oh, no.
Negra Arroyo Lane, Albuquerque, New
A shadow of despair fell over the hunters' faces. One by one, the broken statues began to twitch. Statues without heads, statues with holes in their chests, and statues without arms or legs began hoisting themselves upright. But most worrisome of them all was a statue of the deity that could only be described as gargantuan. Shit. The statues rose to face their prey as if they had never been damaged. Their emotionless faces made them even more grotesque. The hunters retreated until they bumped into something. Huh? It was the door, which had firmly shut and locked while the hunters were distracted. The statues weren't going to let anyone out alive. The angel spoke up. Those of you still standing after my puppets have fallen will have the opportunity to witness the glorious rebirth of the king. It had mentioned the king earlier as well. What the hell is it talking about? Jinchul frowned. He couldn't understand what the monster was blabbering about, but he was certain of one thing. It planned to kill everyone here. He gritted his teeth. Jinchul had worked for the Hunters Association for 4 years and had survived numerous dangerous situations by fighting a tooth and limb. That was his plan today. He had no intention of laying down and dying.
My name is Walter.
But even if I don't make it,
I live at
Hunter's
308
tongue
Negra
had to survive.
Arroyo Lane, Albuquerque,
When he
New
gazed at
Mexico,
Gino,
87104.
the angel statue coincidentally waved its hand at Gino
My
at
name
the
is
same
Walter
time.
Hartwell White.
This one took down my puppets in 5 minutes. It then pointed a finger at the other hunters. I wonder how long it would take for all of you to die. As soon as the angel finished that sentence, Jinchul shouted, "Everyone duck!" The hunters swiftly followed his orders as a red laser swept over their heads. It had been close, but miraculously, there were no casualties. The beam coming from the Colossus slowly dissipated. Oh? The angel statue watched them with interest as it took a step back. They should prove amusing until the king opened his eyes. Huff, huff, huff. Jinchul was breathing hard and sweating profusely. He shuddered to consider what would have happened if he'd been less informed. They survived the first attack thanks to the testimonies provided by the previous survivors, but it wasn't over yet. No, this is just the beginning. Jinchul raised his head to see the statues advancing toward him. Had he not been a top A-rank hunter, he would have been unable to follow their movements. He jumped to his feet, wound up for a punch, and struck a statue with his specially made gauntlet. Kapow! His eyes widened.
My name is Walter Hartwell White.
One strike should have been enough, but the statue was still standing. He'd
He'd
assumed the statue's durability to be
My name is Walter Hartwell White.
They should have known better, considering who caused said damage. The statue's head recoiled slightly, but it soon recovered from the impact and swung at Jinchul with its sword.
I live at 308.
Tisk. Jinchul tutted to himself. He'd put his full power into that punch without considering a counterattack, and the statue's speed and proximity left him with no room to dodge. An explosion sent the approaching statue flying to the side. Jinchul scrunched his features and shook his head to stop the ringing in his ears. A voice came from his right. Are you okay? It was Chongyan, the ultimate hunter. Jinchul nodded to express his gratitude. There was no time for further conversation. Stop. The Colossus was on the move. The smaller statues already had the hunters surrounded. President Che! The tanks called. Provocation skills don't work on them!
Dude, it is still
What?
massive.
Jong's expression
Massive.
hardened.
I mean, I'm seeing like new ones
Without
that I've never seen
provocation,
before that have
the statues
like
would
millions of
instinctively
likes
go
and
after the
views,
weakest
so, like,
hunters
popping
first,
all over the
which
place.
usually meant the healers. With their healers down, their line of defense would
You know
soon
what's
fall
crazy
apart
is
and
that
wouldn't
that
last
lightsaber
long.
fade, like,
To make matters worse,
dude, it is
the
still
Colossus was
massive.
raising its ginormous fist.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like
How
new
we
ones
hope
that
to
I've never
get out
seen
of this
before
alive.
that have like
Low
like,
taper fade.
And there was
all
only
over the
one
place.
possible way out of this mess. Waking up the unconscious hunter song.
You know what's crazy is that that low taper fade, like
According to the
me,
statue, Hunter Song dealt with all of them in just 5 minutes. If the angel statue had previously defeated Gino because he'd been weakened by the other statues, then the current situation was dramatically different. Dozens of excellent hunters had his back. I need you to wake up. power and accuracy of his fireballs were as good as any high-tech modern firearm. This was their Hail Mary. Chongin shot the flames at Jinu. This type of magic might give Jinu a little jolt.
Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade like meme is, dude, it is still massive.
Yeah.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like new ones that I've never seen before that have like millions of likes and views still that are popping up all over the place. Low.
My name is Walter Hartwell White.
Low taper fade. You know what's crazy is that low taper fade
Took
like
everything she had just
Low taper fade.
massive.
instantly
I mean, I'm
end her
seeing, like,
life
new ones that
if
I've
she
never
let
seen
it get
before
past
that
her.
have like millions of likes and views.
Clang,
that are
ka-clang,
all over the
clang,
place.
clang, 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 ka-clang, clang, clack, clang, ka-clang, clang, 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 clang.
Is, dude, it is still massive.
That's it. Just like
I'm
that.
seeing like new ones that I've
Ha,
never seen before
ha.
that have like millions.
The
of
angel was
likes and
enjoying
views, so they're
relentlessly,
popping up all over
bombarding
the place.
Hain with a torrent of punches that would be invisible to the average human.
You know what's crazy?
Hain
is
was
that
pushed
low taper
back little by
fade,
little,
like,
and her
meme
body
is-
was
it
drenched
is
in
still
sweat.
massive.
Maybe it was the sweat,
Massive.
or
Like,
maybe
I'm
she'd
seeing, like,
reached her
new
limit.
ones that I've never seen
But
before
as her
that
sweaty
have, like,
palms
millions
slipped,
of likes
one of
and
the
views,
angel's
so they're
attacks
popping up
slipped
all
through.
over the place.
It was a painful mistake. The punch she had failed to block connected with her
You
shoulder.
know what's crazy? Is that low
Crack!
taper fade, like,
Hain hastily backed away and gritted her teeth, but the bone was broken. Her shoulder went numb. She lamented the loss of her left arm as it dangled uselessly. Ha! Ha! Is that it? Is this all you got? The angel wasted no time and rushed at her, refusing to cut her any slack. The fight between the two resumed. Clang, ka-clang, ka-clang! Hain had barely survived these attacks using both hands, so she had difficulty fending off the angel statue with just one. As more punches connected, her body became battered and bruised. Pow! Ka-pow! Pow! Bones broke and flesh tore. Then came a critical blow. Wham! The statue struck her hard in the stomach, lifting her feet off the ground as she coughed up blood. Ugh. Doubled over, she flew into the air. Her forced ascension made it impossible for her to counter. At this point, the angel lost interest in playing with the broken toy. It approached the falling Hain to deliver the final blow and gathered the fingers of its hand to form a blade aimed at her chest. Suddenly, a blue glow swirled around her, and Hain's eyes shot open in the middle of her fall. She twisted her body and sword around, and the angel came to an abrupt stop, leaning its head back to avoid the blade. The tip of the sword brushed past its eyes. Shink! A thin line appeared across its face. Having successfully landed an attack of her own, Hain regained her balance and landed with both feet on the ground. Thanks to the timely healing spell, she had dodged a bullet. But what was good for one person wasn't always good for another. The angel statue spun around to locate the source of the healing spell. Shit! Hain yelled. Get out of the way! The main healer, who had been casting spells from behind the tankers, flinched at Hain's warning. Huh? But as he turned his head toward Hain, he came face to face with the angel statue. Oh! The main healer's jaw dropped. Without hesitation, the angel statue did to him what he planned to do to Jongin earlier. Bam! The healer's head slammed into the ground. His legs twitched a few times before becoming limp. No! The hunters surrounding the angel statue rushed toward it in anger, but their foe was an unstoppable force against which none of them could stand. Pow, pow! Each time the angel statue threw a punch, an A-rank hunter was helplessly defeated. This isn't fun. Not fun at all, humans. Once the superior being lost interest, it showed no mercy. As the number of hunters dealing damage from the rear dwindled, the line of tanks enduring the assault of the other statues and the Colossus crumbled in no time. It was pure pandemonium. The tide had turned in the blink of an eye. Boom! The giant statue avoided the tanks and slammed its huge fist down, crushing two other hunters. Stone statues brandishing weapons encircled those remaining and began closing in on them. Damn it! Hain quickly cut down four of the statues and then jumped in front of the angel. Stopping it was her priority. But the angel effortlessly blocked her blade with its wrist and kicked her in her side. Whap! Now that the angel was hell-bent on ending this, she could no longer keep it at bay. After seeing Hain fall, Choyin grabbed Jinchul by the shoulder. Jinchul, who had just taken out another statue, jolted in surprise. I'll draw their attention. You wake up Hunter Sung. There's nothing else we can do. What? Isn't he unconscious? Actually, he's asleep. His breathing and magic power are stable, and I don't think there's a single scratch on him. Had someone cast a sleeping spell on him? Jongin had a theory that the angel statue might be protecting Jinu because it was worried what would happen if he woke up. I have no idea what it means by the king's sleep, but considering how desperate the angel had been to defend Jinu, Jongin guessed that their fellow hunter waking would be a fatal blow. Hurry! Jinchul nodded in understanding. Chongin gathered all his magic power, and soon a large halo of fire circling his hands spat flames in every direction. The burning projectiles exploded each time they struck something. Whoosh! Boom! 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 Bam! Naturally, the statues turned to see what all the noise was. While Chongin drew their attention, Jincho rushed to Jinwoo. He prayed Chongin's theory was correct. While Chongin and Jincho teamed up to rouse Jinwoo, the angel statue loomed over Heian, who lay on the ground, struggling to breathe. One side of her ribs had been broken by the kick, and as she struggled to reach for her fallen sword, the angel stepped on her arm. Crack! Ah! She grabbed her shattered arm and screamed in pain. The statue had already done away with those who could heal, and this female was too injured to put up any kind of fight. The lone threat among the humans was about to be eliminated. Ha! Ha! The angel raised its blade-like hand once more. This is the end. Heian continued breathing laboriously as she glared at her executioner. It was over for her, yet she refused to give up. She reminded the angel of Jinwoo's home. During their first encounter, his eyes had burned with the same fire. The corners of the angel's mouth arched upward as it thrust its hand toward Heian's chest, but it paused before it connected. The angel statue flinched and retreated a couple of steps. A shadow soldier was hidden in the human's own shadow. Due to the rules of the chamber, said soldier was unable to emerge, but it was there nonetheless. Heian was puzzled by clear surprise on her enemy's face. It could have killed her just now, but it seemed to be hesitating. And indeed, it was. The king had placed a soldier in this human, but for what purpose? Of course, it could have been Jinwoo's doing, and not the king's. But the king and the human are fused together, even if only slightly. How was the angel statue supposed to distinguish between the king's will and Jinwoo's? If the king had been the one to place the shadow soldier within Heian for whatever reason, the angel couldn't do whatever it wanted to her. The angel demanded, "How did you find this place?" Heian didn't answer, but the silence grew long. The angel changed its question. "What connection do you all have with Jinwoo's home?" Heian kept quiet, fully aware that she wasn't obliged to answer. Realizing it wouldn't get anything out of her, the creature changed tack. The angel statue snapped its fingers, and the screaming hunters immediately went silent. As if on command, the Colossus and the other stone statues paused and slowly headed to the far side of the lair. The angel statue then extended its palm, and an invisible hand drove Jincho, who had been making his way to Jinwoo, to the ground. Ugh. Jincho tried his best to resist this unseen force above him, but he couldn't move an inch. Jincho clenched his fists and let out a huff. The angel dropped its hand. Nothing in the lair escaped its notice. Struggle as a human's might, it had them all dancing to its whim. That was the difference between it, a superior being, and humans. There was no way to bridge that gap. I shall ask again. The angel statue pointed at Jincho. If you do not answer me this time, I shall kill that man as well as all your other colleagues. Fine. Heian nodded. If this helped buy them time, that would be a huge help. The angel statue stared as she struggled to sit up. What is your relationship to Jinwoo's home? We're friends.
Massive. I mean, I'm seeing like.
Why did you come here? She pondered her response before replying. To save Hunter Sung. The answer brought a smile to the angel's face. Just who was saving whom now? It was clear these humans had no idea what was truly going on. The angel was mortified for suspecting that the king might have a plan for this woman. These people had come to this place for the human Jinwoo's home. The stone angel couldn't contain its laughter. It then turned to Heian. I shall bless you with an opportunity.
We've been fighting for a while.
What opportunity?
On the seventh day, we
Today,
ran out of ammo.
one of the noble sovereigns shall descend upon this world. I shall bless you with the opportunity to witness such a glorious moment in history. Until the angel
pistols,
statue could confirm the king's
shotgun
intentions,
rounds,
it had to keep her
a
alive.
handful of grenades.
However, she was the sole exception. It didn't plan on letting the other
Master
humans
Chief
go free.
armed his grenade.
Every
I was in the
human
back
except
of an
you.
overturned
His smile
warthog
had vanished,
firing an
and the angel
M41.
now looked downright maniacal.
We knew
Will
Master
die
Chief
right
was
here.
still in the fight.
After all, it wasn't okay
He
for the
gave us
uninvited
hope.
guests to be present for His Highness's majestic return.
We'd been fighting for
A voice from
while.
behind challenged him.
On the
Says
7th
who?
day, we ran out of ammo.
Before the angel statue could turn around, a fist connected with its
We
face.
had to scatter.
Blam! The statue slammed into the far wall. Boom! The impact shattered the wall, sending rubble tumbling down. Before the angel statue could collapse to the floor, Ginu appeared in front of it and grabbed it by the throat. You! Ginu's other hand was on his own chest. Sure enough, it hadn't been just a dream. There was another heart beating on the right side of his chest. Ginu squeezed the statue's neck as he growled, "What the hell did you do to my body?" 8. The Black Heart. At some point while reliving the memory, Ginu had become the Shadow Monarch himself. In that moment, he came to the realization that a mana-powered heart that constantly radiated magic power had been beating inside his chest. Was this all in his head? That was something he could easily check. Stats. Ginu called up the stat window with his hand still wrapped around the neck of the angel statue. Out of the many statistics tracked were his current reserves of magic power, which the system labeled as MP, or mana points. MP 109,433. Ginu was stunned. 100,000? He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The last time he checked his MP, which was immediately before departing for this very dungeon, it had only been around 9,000. There was no mistake about it. His MP had increased over tenfold. Something else caught his attention. My title. The title line blinked as if to indicate it had changed. Even though Ginu hadn't personally switched anything, the title had been revised. It now read Demon Hunter. Ginu had simply ignored it until now because its information hadn't been revealed, so he went ahead and checked the details. Title, Demon Hunter. The required conditions have been fulfilled. You have recovered the memories of defeating Balan, the demon monarch of White Lightning. A great power has accepted the player as its owner. Buff, Black Heart, MP, plus 100,000. The Black Heart. That was the reason for the insane jump in MP. 100,000 more mana would be enough power to pretty much regenerate his Shadow Soldiers ad infinitum. The image of the Shadow Monarch as he led the army of respawning soldiers against the Silver Soldiers who blotted out the sky sprang to mind. His soldiers had been in a never-ending cycle of death and rebirth that allowed them to gradually overwhelm their enemies. The soldiers of the sky, although strong enough to push back an opposing force roughly the same size as their own army, couldn't keep up with the regenerating Shadow Soldiers and were ultimately forced to retreat. If not for the timely arrival of reinforcements, the Silver Soldiers would have been annihilated, and that was thanks to the Shadow Monarch's endless source of mana, as seen in the system file. If that's the case, the Black Heart would make his Shadow Soldiers immortal. The thought gave me goosebumps. How could you? Ginu looked up at the stammering angel. For the first time, Ginu noted a look on the angel's face that wasn't a sickening smile or pure rage. It was fear. The angel was staring at Ginu, horror-struck. How are you maintaining your own consciousness, even as the Black Heart beats within you? Huh? This question revealed two things to Ginu. One, the angel statue wasn't directly responsible for the Black Heart. And two, this outcome wasn't in its favor. Ginu tightened his grip on the angel's neck, causing cracks to form. Oh. The architect's face twisted in pain. Tell me what a player is. What were you planning on doing to me? Jinu wouldn't relent, meaning he could break its neck at a moment's notice. Unfortunately, the angel wasn't in the right frame of mind to provide answers. No way. Shadow Monarch, you... Do you think the other monarchs will just sit back and let this happen? The angel statue glared at Jinu as it blathered.
Send me some money.
Jinu's finger punched a hole in the creature's neck. He could now break it with a single twitch of a finger. The angel felt excruciating pain. Oh! It let out an agonized screech toward the ceiling. Jinu had so many things he wanted to ask. Answer my question. Having passed the test, Jinu had earned the right to interrogate the angel, so it was only fair for him to demand the reward that had been promised. Instead, a bright red light flashed from the angel. Ah! What the? The other hunters began screaming, prompting Jinu to look over his shoulder. Those things! They're coming! The Colossus and the other statues had retreated to a corner of the lair earlier, but they now began moving again, their eyes glowing red. Ha ha. The angel statue sounded pleased with himself. If you kill me, there'll be no one to call off my puppets. Will you kill me now? The angel was issuing a challenge to Jinu. Inferior beings had so many weaknesses, and if Jinu truly was a human, he'd have plenty to exploit. He must have had someone he deemed a friend among the hunters. What's this? Contrary to the angel's expectations, Jinu grinned. What if I deal with the puppets after I kill you? Taken aback, the angel statue hurriedly answered, If you kill me, then the architect of the system... See, I've thought about that too, Jinu interrupted. He looked at the angel with the same gaze it leveled at the humans. You know, even if the architect of the system disappeared, I doubt the whole system would collapse. Jinu called the statue's bluff. He knew everything it had purposefully omitted. The angel had been careless and forgotten why it had chosen Jinu in the first place. He excelled at seeing through the rules. You force my hand, then. The angel statue played its last card. Bing! System administrator access denied. System administrator access denied. System administrator access denied. Bing, bing. The chime went off several more times, but the same notification appeared. System administrator access denied. The angel froze. It had attempted to manipulate the system, but had been rejected. When Jinu shrugged, the angel thrashed in his grip. You bastard! Ah! It apparently had no intention of providing Jinu with answers. No reason to let you live then. Jinu released the angel's neck and threw a mana-powered left hook. Pow!
The fight.
He not only punched through the statue's body, but also left a gaping hole in the wall behind it. Silence immediately fell in his vicinity. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Jinu had administered a punishment befitting the crime the angel had perpetrated. The statue's head and half its torso had been obliterated. What remained slowly slid down the wall. It's too bad I couldn't get an answer. But the angel had been tricking Jinu from the start.
Yeah,
So how could he believe anything it said anyway? This'll do. He dusted off his left hand as if symbolically wiping away any regret. An urgent voice yelled out to Jinu. Hunter's hung! All right. Jinu turned. He'd been so focused on the angel that he'd forgotten about the rest of the statues, which were mercilessly attacking the humans as per the puppeteer's final instructions. Hunter's hung! Chongin was frantically calling for Jinu while casting spells to defend against the onslaught. Pow! Jinchul stumbled after taking a punch to the chin. As he tried to steady his shaky legs,
Ninjago!
he took in the sight of
Ninjago!
His mind went blank.
Let's go!
What had he been doing just now?
Let's go!
By the time he got his bearings, The statue was right in front of him. Jincho confirmed he'd been struck
My boy Lloyd can.
that it looked like several
Ninja go! Ninja go! Come on, come on, let's turn around and smash!
You count it as a weapon? He remembered an episode of a courtroom drama involving
Ninja go!
same question and laughed. The stones never mind the energy for a counterattack. Jincho could only smile ruefully and drop his hands in surrender. Kaboom! The statue split in two at the waist and was tossed aside. Huh? Jincho snapped back to attention. His eyes blinked, and he shook his head as a familiar man came up next to him. Are you okay? Oh! Jincho gasped. It was Jincho. Shocked, Jincho could barely get out his question. Did you just use your bare hands? Let's talk details later. Gino ran off, leaving his comrade behind. He looked around until light bouncing off metal finally caught his eye. It was his missing demon monarchy dagger. Found it. Gino stretched his hand out toward the blade,
Kick around
using
and
his invisible hand to
spin!
deliver it.
Ninja go! Ninja
The
go!
grip of this dagger always felt good in his hands. Whap! First, Gino kicked aside the statue blocking his way, and then started mowing down the others. Hup. As he did, he took a deep breath. He alone could move freely as time slowed. He vanished from view, and the only thing the other hunters could make out were the statues being destroyed. Shh! Thud! 4 assailants fell to the ground simultaneously. Hunters whom Gino had pulled from the brink of death stood there with their mouths agape. Huh? Jincho joined them and muttered, He renders you speechless, doesn't he? Yes, the hunters nodded. It's the same for me. Despite having seen Gino in action several times before, Jincho was no less amazed. A bittersweet look crossed his face as he placed a cigarette between his lips. One of the members of the surveillance team approached him. Manager Wu, should we be standing around like this? What do you mean? Hunter Sung is fighting the beasts and... They trailed off as they got a proper look at Jinu. What? Jincho stuck a cigarette into the hunter's open mouth and lit it for him. Do you think there's room for us out there? No, sir. So let's stay out of his way and smoke. Yes, sir. Other hunters who had also been watching Jinu in admiration gathered around Jincho. He quickly ran out of cigarettes. Suddenly, the tip of Jincho's nose began to tingle. I lost count of how many times I almost died here. The statues had seemed undefeatable to him, so he was relieved and overjoyed to witness Jinu taking care of business all on his own. Manager Wu, are you crying? No, of course not. I've got smoke in my eyes. Oh yeah, me too. Me too. Same. There was so much cigarette smoke in the air, all the hunters were teary-eyed. Bam! Ki-hoon blocked the punch from the Colossus with his shield and let out a grunt. Ugh. His knees buckled. With no healer to help him, he had no choice but to endure the blows on his own. But he'd reached his limit. Somebody help! When he strained to see where his teammates were, he spotted them gathered leisurely to one side. What the hell? They weren't going to bother coming to his aid, even though he was pouring out his blood, sweat, and tears to keep them safe. Pissed off, Ki-hoon bellowed, What the hell are you all doing? The other hunters responded by pointing at something above him. He took it as a warning of another impending attack, and he hefted his shield and braced for impact. But nothing came. Ki-hoon abruptly noticed how quiet it was. What now? He surreptitiously sneaked a peek from under his shield and saw that the rest of the stone statues had been destroyed. What? Flabbergasted, he lowered his shield. It was only then that he could clearly see what everyone had been pointing at. There was the Colossus, standing as tall as a skyscraper, and there was Chinu, perched on its shoulder. Huh? Kaboom! Jinu punched the remaining half of the giant statue's face clear off. The headless behemoth began to teeter. Whoa, huh? Every fiber of Ki-hoon's being told him he needed to run like the wind. Sure enough, The Colossus came tumbling down right where he had been standing a second ago. The entire area was blanketed in thick clouds of dust. After a coughing fit, Chongin waved his hand in the air to clear the dust from his face as he approached Hagen. Hunter Cha! Sir? Are you okay? Can you get up? Hagen gave a low moan and shook her head. Every inch of her body was screaming at her. Chongin frowned sympathetically. Let me help you. Take it easy. As Chongin tried to support her torso, Jinyu appeared next to them after wrapping up his task. May I help, Hunter Cha? Pardon? As Chongin turned toward Jinyu, he felt Hagen gently push his hand aside. In his confusion, he agreed. Oh, yes, sure. Jinyu immediately lifted the blushing Hagen in his arms. Please hold on a little longer. He ran to the exit and kicked the locked door. Thud. One kick was all it took. The door the high-ranked hunters had struggled to open in vain was now in pieces. On the other side, Jinyu gently laid Hagen on the ground. She was in bad shape, so he called up the shop, purchased a high-level healing potion, and poured it into her mouth. Gulp, gulp. Her wounds healed surprisingly quickly.
Massive.
How? Jinyu held up a finger. Now was not the best time to explain. The other hunters exited the lair. It could have been worse, but while everyone looked awful, no one else appeared to need emergency treatment. Jinyu closed the shop. The hunters were surprised to see Hagen get on her feet, unaware of the potion's existence. Hunter Cha, just a few minutes ago. The thing is, Hagen started to respond out of habit before changing the subject after a glance at Jinyu. There's no time to explain. Let's get out of here first. The others agreed. Are there any more survivors? Hagen asked Jinyu, since he had the best perception. Jinyu scanned the inside of the lair and shook his head. 17 people stood there. More than half the hunters who had entered were dead. The mood instantly shifted as everyone quietly grieved. I see. As Hagen turned away with a dark expression, Jinyu took her by the wrist. She looked back at him. At this moment, he wasn't concerned about why the Hunters Guild was here. There was something he was more curious about. What happened in Japan? Jinyu had entered the lair right before the dungeon break occurred, so he had no idea how it had all turned out. Hagen searched for the right words. Japan is doomed. Yuri's plan to block the gate with a barrier spell had been a dangerous gamble to begin with, considering this was an S-ranked gate. When it came to both hunters and gates, the S meant that their power was impossible to evaluate or measure, which in turn meant that anything could happen. Nonetheless, Yuri had grossly overestimated his own abilities, and his arrogance had led to a disastrous result. Jinyu had mixed feelings. President Go had told him what the Japanese hunters had pulled on Jeju Island. While the members of the Hunters Association of Korea had been unable to ascertain their ultimate goal, they had full knowledge of what had transpired on the island. If it hadn't been for Jinyu, the Korean hunters would have had a tough time of it, even without the monstrous ant in the mix. To make matters worse, the president of the Hunters Association of Japan had the nerve to come to Korea and threaten President Go. They're getting what they deserve. On the other hand, only the leaders and the top-ranked Japanese hunters had been aware of the plan. Despite some lingering tension over unresolved historical issues, no innocent Japanese citizens deserved to lose their lives. A dungeon break in the middle of Seoul not too long ago had resulted in the deaths of nearly half the students at the school at the hands of orcs.
That was all of them.
But what if an S-ranked gate opened in the middle of a metropolis of over 13 million people?
Yes.
It would obviously be a horrendous tragedy. Besides, the Hunters Association of Japan itself was partially to blame for this disaster. Things would have been different if their best hunters, like Ryuji Goto, were still alive. Ryuji had been a powerhouse, strong enough to make even Jinyu feel threatened. He managed to catch Jinyu by surprise with an attack that had narrowly missed blinding him, and he wasn't the only one. The Japanese hunters who were found dead on Jeju Island had all surpassed the Korean S-rank hunters in strength. Jinyu didn't know anything about their combat abilities, but the amount of mana left in their bodies had been a good indicator. At the time, he hadn't wanted to turn innocent humans into undead shadow soldiers, but they'd been strong enough to momentarily tempt him. If I'd known their true objective, I probably would have done it anyway. He'd only learned the truth much later. In any case, it was because of their scheming that Japan now lacked hunters of a caliber to deal with the S-rank gate. This wasn't an act of God. It was a man-made disaster caused by human greed. Hunter's hung? Heian sounded concerned. Jinu hadn't let go of her wrist. I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else just now. Oh, Jinu released her. But Heian's worry lay in his grim expression. She couldn't help but wonder whether he had relatives or friends in Japan. Heian herself had no idea that the Japanese Hunters Association had drawn up such a dastardly plan. So she viewed the events unfolding in Japan as a tragic accident. With his most pressing question answered, Jinu now turned his attention to the other matter that had him curious. So what brought you here anyway? Heian, Chongin, Jinu, plus Kihun and his team members, whom Jinu had met that time he fought Fang, side by side with members of the Hunters Guild and the surveillance team. Two groups that didn't have much to do with each other were gathered around him. Jincho finished checking on the injuries of his subordinates before stepping forward to speak. We received a report about this gate and found out you had gone inside. But seeing how much magic power was seeping out, Jinu turned to look at Jinchar, who looked upset by the number of casualties. We realized we couldn't handle it on our own, so we requested help from the Hunters Guild, who were already nearby. The right to request assistance in case of emergency. It was the ultimate form of authority the association possessed over the guilds. Not even the Hunters Guild could have rejected the call. Jinu's heart ached as he realized how many people had come to his aid, and how many lives had been sacrificed as a result. As Jinu fell silent, Jinchar gingerly inquired, "May I ask you a question, Hunter-song?" "Yes?" "How did you know there was a double dungeon here?" It was something weighing on many people's minds, including Chongin, who, as the president of the Hunters Guild, had suffered much loss today. How had Jinu known there was a double dungeon hidden within this C-rank gate, or that there would be a beast beyond their wildest imagination waiting inside? They were curious to hear his side of the story. Rumble. A tremor signaled that the gate was closing, but everyone's attention was on Jinu. He decided to tell them the truth. "The dungeon summoned me." "It summoned you?" Jinchul found this difficult to believe. "Yes, I received a message to come here." "May I see that message?" Jinu shook his head and pointed to his temple. "I can only see it in my head." The other hunters were at a loss for words at the unexpected explanation. While Jinu might have purposely withheld some of the pertinent details, he wasn't lying. They didn't know what to make of his earnest expression. Jinchar, who had known him the longest, shook his head a few times. He's someone I can't apply common sense to." If the dungeon summoned him in his mind, maybe Jinu was a heavenly avatar sent to Earth to destroy every single dungeon. Okay, now I'm just being silly. While Jinchul huffed out a laugh, Jinu walked past him through the door and back into the lair. In a panic, Heian called out to him, "Hunter-san, we'll be in danger if we don't leave now." Hearing the worry in her voice, Jinu turned and answered, "I know." Why wouldn't he know that? He had walked the entire length of the tunnel twice already. Doing so took almost an hour, even at the walking pace of an average hunter. So if they wanted to get out before the gate closed, they were running out of time. Furthermore, Jinu's father had gone missing inside the gate. He was told that his father, despite being gravely wounded, had helped his teammates out of the boss's lair, only to end up trapped when the gate closed. Because nobody understood the dangers of a dungeon better than him, his reply to Heian was filled with conviction. "I can't leave the hunters who came to my rescue behind." Those assembled who were anxious to leave froze at his word. The people who had lost their lives in that lair were their precious colleagues and friends, and no one wished to leave them behind. Unfortunately, there simply wasn't enough time to carry out their remains. Not only were the hunters exhausted, but they'd also have to take the time to locate and reclaim their friends' bodies from beneath the rubble of the lair. Hence, with tears in their eyes, they'd resolved to leave the fallen behind. I'm taking them back with me. The statement hit everyone like a bolt of lightning. No one could bring themselves to argue that there was no time left and that they had to get out now. They watched him in a daze. Chongin meekly asked, "Could we please leave it to you?" The guild members were like his family. He didn't want them rotting away in this icy cavern. Jinwoo nodded and turned around. But his heart was beating quietly. Focus on it more. Essentially, his two hearts beat as one. It took every ounce of his concentration to separate the sound of the black heart from his regular heartbeat. Jinwoo gathered the mana pulsing from the black heart in his fingertips. Is this how he did it? Jinwoo mimicked Shadow Monarch's hand gesture and raised his hand with his palm up, as if holding something. He could feel the powerful magic in his hand. He was certain he could do this. Jinwoo quickly located the deceased hunters' bodies through their mana signatures. His eyes were aglow as he broke the silence in the lair.
Arise.
Ruler's authority. Rumble. Bodies rose into the air from under the rubble. Whoa! No way! The hunters who were holding their breath as they watched Jinwoo now exhaled in amazement. Not only had Jinwoo instantly located the deceased hunters, but he dug them out without laying a finger on the bodies. It was like a superpower one would see in a movie. The floating bodies levitated out the door. Wow, how is that even possible? In the same way the average person was fascinated by a hunter's powers, these elite hunters were astonished by Jinwoo's abilities. Chongyi, who held extensive knowledge about magic power, couldn't believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. What kind of skill is that? He had never seen or heard of this kind of ability before, but after watching Jinwoo's display, Chongyin realized he'd been misunderstanding something. When he first laid eyes on the angel statue, he'd been convinced that it had defeated Jinwoo. He was totally wrong. What magic beast stood a chance against a hunter wielding such a mighty power? Chongyin shook his head. It'd be impossible. Heck, Jinwoo had taken down the angel as soon as he woke up. How could anyone not be amazed by it? Jinwoo carefully moved the lifeless bodies to one side, and he summoned his shadow soldiers, which he was allowed to do outside of the temple. The shadow soldiers scooped up the bodies in their arms. The living gawked at Jinwoo as he addressed them. Let's get out of here. The hunters nodded as the dungeon trembled once more. The shadow soldiers followed right behind the humans, and Jinwoo hung back to watch them before he turned to face the unmoving Heian. Although fully healed, she looked drained. Of course she is. The angel statue was a creature he'd had trouble contending with, so Heian would definitely be exhausted after fending it off single-handedly. Jinwoo approached her. Would you like to lean on me? Heian gave a wan smile and shook her head. He took her by the wrist again as she quietly looked up at him. He spoke softly to put her at ease. We should get going too. She wordlessly nodded as she mourned the deaths of her colleagues. Hunters began emerging from the gate. No one waiting outside had any idea of the scale of what had transpired on the inside, but the sight of the deceased hunters being carried out by the shadow soldiers made it clear that something awful had happened. Oh my God! Are those all... The members of the Bravery Guild who had reported this matter and the employees from the association who had been standing by all paled as they watched the procession. The number of casualties was simply far too high. They were elite hunters, the very best of the Hunters Guild and the surveillance team, and yet... Jinwoo and Heian were the last ones to step out into the night. Enough time had passed that it was now dark. The reporter, Kim, had stayed the entire time to keep an eye on the situation. His eyes widened as he took in the condition of the two S-rank hunters, caked blood, tattered clothing, and disheveled hair, the markings of an epic battle. Sure, Hunter Cha still looked quite lovely, even in that state, but Hunter Sung looked like he'd been to hell and back. That's it! That's the shot! Kim raised his camera, his hands trembling. The reason he'd become a reporter in the first place was for this very reason, to document events such as this. He wanted to let people know that while everyone had been focused on Japan, certain individuals had willingly put their lives on the line to fight for their own country. Close to 20 of Korea's top hunters had perished today. If this dungeon had broken, it would have meant an even greater loss of life and destruction on an unimaginable scale. These people had made the ultimate sacrifice to prevent an even bigger tragedy. If Kim hadn't been here to report the heroic deeds of these people, would the public ever have heard their tale? He stalked the association to stumble upon stories like this. He was so moved that tears welled in his eyes as he busily snapped away. Jincheol's legs finally gave out on him, and he sat to rest just outside the gate, which was where Jinwoo found him.
Oh shit.
Hunter's home. Jincheol tried to get up, but Jinwoo stopped him and gestured at the reporter in the distance. Is he allowed to take my picture? Jincheol had to laugh. Taking your picture outside of work is prohibited, but just like the Jeju Island raid, it's impossible to stop them from reporting these incidents. Jinwoo nodded in understanding. His mother might freak out if she saw him in this state, but while that did worry him, he couldn't force the reporter to stop doing his job. Besides, he also wanted someone to let the world know of the ultimate price these hunters had paid and how they prevented another tragedy. A quiet wind blew, carrying the sound of distant ambulance sirens with it. The following morning, the front page of every newspaper carried a headline about the dungeon break in Japan. Only one publication reported on the news about the double dungeon incident. That newspaper sold the most copies that day. 9. Blank check. The Hunter Command Center of America dispatched agents stationed in Asia to assess the situation in Japan. A helicopter left the safe zone and entered Tokyo's airspace. The senior agent who had volunteered to risk his life looked down and sucked his teeth. This is ghastly. Tokyo was worse off than he thought. The dungeon break had left the city in ruins. Buildings had lost their shape, cars were crumbled like paper, streetlights were bent in half, and there was fire, smoke, and ash where structures once stood. Ghastly was an appropriate word to describe it. The agent furrowed his brow. He now knew what hell looked like. However, he hadn't come here to mourn the decimated city. He had a job to do. He inspected the carnage as he took footage from their bird's-eye view. He turned to the Japanese representative sitting next to him. Considering all this damage, it's hard to spot any bodies. His training at the Hunter Command Center had included learning about the S-rank dungeon break on Jeju Island. In all the videos and photographs, the streets of Jeju had been littered with the bodies of residents who failed to escape the island. It was one of the worst tragedies in human history. So the Hunter Command Center kept detailed records of the event. Yet, despite the utter devastation here, there were no corpses in sight. In fact, there wasn't even a hint of the dead to be found. The Japanese representative explained, "Of course, the giants ate everyone." It was obvious from his bloodshot eyes and unshaven face that this young man working for the Hunters Association of Japan had been through a lot lately. With a worried expression, he continued, "It's like they're trying to erase every trace of humanity from the place. They knock down buildings, eat humans, and even uproot trees planted along the sidewalks." The agent agreed with his assessment. The giants from the S-rank gate were different from other magic beasts. Typically, beasts' sole aim was to kill humans, while these giant beasts were destroying everything in sight. No matter where they looked, there wasn't a single building or house left standing in the giants' wake.
I'm tired.
But thanks to that, we were able to buy some time. The association personnel gave a wry smile, unsure whether he should be grateful or sad that some people were able to escape with their lives because the giants were so thorough in their destruction. The warring emotions were on full display on his face.